Do you believe that true talent sometimes doesn't rise from dazzling stages, but quietly grows in dusty, cleaned-up rooms? There are people who aren't born to be seen, not born to be applauded, yet they carry within them a symphony that silences the world the moment it's heard. This isn't a fairy tale. This is a true story about a woman whose hands were rough with calluses, once asked to play a broken piano as a joke, and then she, the very one, moved an entire hall of people, even the proudest of them, to their feet before they had time to wipe their tears. This is the journey of Elise Laurent, a janitor, a forgotten genius, a symbol of quiet light and unshakable perseverance. Manhattan, early morning. The first rays of sunlight pierced through the towering glass windows of the Whitmore Conservatory of Music, casting a golden hue across the gleaming wooden floors and a row of silent grand pianos, proud witnesses to the heights of musical artistry. Lena Thompson, 42, bent down to wipe the final speck of dust from the glossy black Steinway at the center of the main concert hall. Her hands were rough, hardened over the years, not from playing the piano, but from scrubbing floors and polishing keys she had never dared touch. A faded silver bracelet shimmered faintly on her wrist, the only gift her mother left behind before passing away. Though gone for years, her mother seemed to live on in Lena's every gentle motion as she touched the instrument. "All done, Lena." The stern voice of Mrs. Henderson, the front desk receptionist, echoed from across the hall. "Don't forget, they're moving in for the Steinberg competition tonight. Best clear out before those puffed-up artists start pouring in." Lena gave a soft smile and nodded, but didn't leave. Instead, her eyes quietly drifted to the grand piano in the center of the room, the familiar Steinway, where each key seemed to hold the resonance of the world's greatest performances. A stillness lingered. Then, like a thief of time, Lena slowly stepped forward and sat down on the bench. She didn't play. She simply laid her hands on the white keys, as if reaching back into a forgotten past, a dream buried beneath stacks of bills, prescriptions, and nameless night shifts. When she was 7, her mother worked as a waitress at a jazz bar in Brooklyn. On nights when the patrons had left, the floors were spotless, and the soft lights still glowed faintly. The old pianist would let the little girl play for a few minutes. "You've got an ear," he often told her. "Some folks study a lifetime and never find that." But then her mother fell ill. The free piano lessons disappeared. Life, from then on, became a quiet race for survival. "Are you cleaning the piano or warming up your fingers?" A male voice rang out behind her. Lena startled. A young security guard, uniform still crisp, leaned casually in the doorway, his eyes kind. The name Marco gleamed under the sunlight on his badge. "I was just checking if the keys were clean," Lena mumbled, quickly rising, adjusting her apron. "No one checks like that unless they've played before." Marco smiled, glancing at her hands. "Those aren't the hands of a regular janitor." Lena looked down at her hands. Long fingers, defined knuckles, her fingers still unconsciously curled, as if ready to form a chord. She pressed her lips together. "I've never trained formally, and these pianos aren't for people like me." "What kind of people is that?" Marco asked, not mocking, just quietly, like holding up a mirror to her heart. Lena didn't know how to respond. Marco hesitated, then added, "Did you know this year's Steinberg has a wildcard slot? One spot for someone unknown. Auditions are tomorrow morning." Lena laughed. The sound echoed across the empty concert hall like a misplaced note. "I'd get kicked out the moment I walk in wearing this cleaning uniform." Marco didn't laugh. "What's the worst that could happen?" "Humiliation." Laughter. Proving I'm just a faded childhood fantasy." "And the best thing?" Marco asked gently. Lena didn't answer. But that question followed her all the way home that night, to her tiny apartment in Queens. like a quiet melody threading through the chaos of life. The next morning, New York was draped in grey, like a dust cloth hanging outside a window. Elise stepped into the Madison Conservatory's grand hall in her silver-grey janitorial uniform, the scent of cleaning solutions still lingering on her sleeves. Her heart pounded as she looked up at the sign. Wildcard auditions, Steinberg competition. No one noticed her, just the usual cleaning lady. But for Elise, every step she took today was a rebellion against the years she'd spent denying her own voice. Inside the waiting room, the air buzzed with laughter and scrutinizing glances. Young contestants in velvet dresses and tailored suits exchanged thoughts on Chopin, Liszt and Debussy, as if each were the rightful heir to musical genius. Elise stood alone in the corner, hands gripping the folded application Miguel had pressed into her hand that morning. She had filled out only her name, Elise Laurent, 41. A silver-haired woman in formal attire was checking off names from a list. Elise stepped forward, her voice thin as thread. "I would like to try." The woman's eyes flicked to Elise's uniform, scanning her quickly before returning to her clipboard. "Do you have a name?" "Elise Laurent. I'll be performing an original piece." A moment of silence. The woman paused, looked up. "No score, no printout, no Chopin. It's just me, and a piece I wrote many years ago. You'll be the last if there's still time." Her words fell like a system error alert, a reminder that Elise was a stranger who didn't belong here. Elise nodded, quietly sitting down on a wooden chair in the corner. Sweat beaded on her palms, but she didn't wipe it away. She let her hands absorb the nerves, for they had only known how to scrub dust, not how to perform under hundreds of eyes. A young man across the room called out mockingly, "Hey, new uniform for the janitorial squad?" Laughter erupted. Elise turned to see a slick-haired youth, reclining with a smirk. A girl next to him giggled and whispered, "Didn't know janitors audition for Steinberg now." Elise bowed her head, lips tight, but deep inside, something stirred, like the jazz she had once heard in smoky clubs as a child. Hesitant, imperfect, but real. When her name was finally called, the room seemed to skip a beat. Miguel stood at the door, giving her a quick wink, a quiet message. "Just step forward. Let the music speak." Elise took a deep breath, rose to her feet, and walked toward the performance hall, where fate was waiting. The room fell completely silent. As Elise entered, 3 judges sat above the wooden dais, an elderly man with silver-streaked hair and wire-rimmed glasses, a young woman with her hair in a tight bun, and in the center, Madame Whitmore, once known as the Golden Hands of Carnegie Hall. Elise stood under the glow of the chandelier. Her janitor's uniform made her seem even more out of place amidst this room of refined melodies and rigid standards. "Contestant's name," Whitmore's voice rang out. "Elise Laurent, piece to be performed, an original. Composed by me." Whitmore furrowed her brow, turning to her assistant. "Strange. No manuscript. No arrangement. No, ma'am. She says it's self-composed." A faint ripple of laughter rose from a few rows behind the judges. Elise heard it clearly. Self-composed? "On a broomstick, maybe." Whitmore tapped her pen lightly on the table, her gaze sharp as a blade. "Miss Laurent, the Steinway in the center, is reserved for contestants who passed the preliminary round. But, given the circumstances perhaps," she stood and gestured toward the far corner of the room, "the upright piano over there would be more appropriate. It's old, out of tune, but should suffice for testing a self-composed piece." All eyes turned. There, tucked behind a curtain, stood a worn upright piano, faded wood, dust settling between the keys, some of which had yellowed with age. Elise walked toward it. No resistance, no hesitation. She had once played pianos with broken keys in old churches, once borrowed a battered keyboard in a shelter to play for her sick mother. She didn't need a Steinway. She only needed someone to listen. Elise sat down. The wooden bench creaked beneath her. She placed her hands gently on the keys. Cold, dry, and coarse. She closed her eyes. Her breath paused. The first note sounded harsh and off-key. A soft chuckle echoed from somewhere in the hall. But Elise didn't stop. Her left hand began to set the rhythm. Her right hand drifted across the broken notes, patching together fragments of memories. And then something strange happened. The music began to breathe, not with technical perfection, but with a deep, aching tenderness. Each note trembled with longing for lost childhoods, for lullabies sung at hospital bedsides, for dreams buried beneath layers of dust and duty. The audience grew still. The old man removed his glasses. The young judge stopped writing mid-note, hands frozen. Even Whitmore, the most rigid of them all, sat upright. Her lips no longer curled in disdain. Elise played as if speaking to her 7-year-old self, as if apologizing to the dreams she'd set aside for survival, and as if every note had been waiting for her to return. All her life, the piece ended with a trembling chord, a final sigh from the past, lingering in the air. No applause, not because they didn't want to, but because no one dared disturb that sacred moment. 5 seconds. 10. Then, from the back of the room, a single clap, then more. Then the entire hall rose to its feet, an eruption of something no one expected, at a wild card audition. And when Elise stood and bowed quietly, Whitmore rose as well. For the first time that morning, she said nothing. She just looked at Elise, long and deeply, and in that look was recognition. The hallway behind the concert hall was hushed. Soft morning light spilled through the windows, casting pale gold streaks on the old tiled floor. Elise stood alone, her hands still trembling faintly. She had just placed her fingers on a scratch along the piano's side, as if to say thank you, when a familiar voice called out behind her. "Where did you learn to play?" Elise turned around. It was Whitmore, no longer towering from her judge's seat. No arrogance, just an older woman now, her eyes reflecting something more complex than surprise, a hint of regret, a glimmer of awe, and maybe a trace of longing. Elise spoke softly, but clearly. "I never trained formally. When I was a girl, I listened to music at the cafe where my mother worked. Sometimes the old pianist would teach me a few chords. The rest I learned from life." Whitmore stepped closer, stopping a few feet away. "I've waited many years to hear a piece like that, from someone with no transcripts, no medals, no musical pedigree." Elise stayed silent, unsure if this was praise or a quiet reckoning. Whitmore sighed, her gaze drifting toward the old upright piano. "That piano, 32 years ago. I performed my first concert on it. Back then, it was the only instrument the conservatory could afford to rent me. A poor student from Philadelphia." Elise's eyes widened. For the first time, the living statue that was Whitmore revealed a crack, something unmistakably human. "I forgot where I came from, Elise," she said, her voice lower now. "Sometimes the music world forces us to wear pride like armor. I've worn it for too long. And today, perhaps, I saw myself in you." Silence filled the space. Elise touched the scratch on the piano's side. "Have you ever been afraid to return to who you really are?" Whitmore didn't answer immediately. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Every time I walk on stage," that answer made Elise smile, a smile of shared understanding across generations. One woman finding herself again after years of wandering, another just stepping into the place she was always meant to be. Whitmore reached into her coat pocket and handed Elise a beige handkerchief with an old, embroidered pattern. "Wipe your hands," she said gently. "I think it's time you get used to your hands doing more than just cleaning floors." Elise took it, her eyes stinging. Whitmore turned to leave, but paused. Elise Laurent, the final round will be brutal. Everyone you'll face is considered a light, at least on paper. But today, you made an entire hall rise to their feet, and that cannot be taught. She stopped at the door, tilted her head, and said, "Not as a judge, but as an artist. Next week, when you step on stage, don't play to prove anything. Play to remind them why they fell in love with music in the first place." Then she walked away, slowly but steadily. Elise remained in the empty corridor, her hand clutching the old handkerchief like a sacred charm. Her heart beat, not out of fear, but because, for the first time in her life, her dream was no longer waiting outside the window. It was waiting for her, on stage. The grand finale of the Steinberg competition was held in the largest concert hall of the Manhattan Conservatory of Music. Rows of red velvet seats were packed with spectators. The ceiling lights sparkled like a miniature galaxy, reflecting off eager, cold, curious, and often judgmental eyes. Backstage, Elise sat alone on a wooden bench near the wall. No makeup, no hairstylist, no fashion consultant, just Elise. Her hair tied simply, a plain black dress on her, and hands still marked by the calluses of years spent dusting piano keys she was never allowed to touch. Beside her sat the old beige handkerchief, the only thing she carried, a quiet reminder that she hadn't come here to impress anyone. She came to be herself. The announcer's voice rang out, introducing each contestant. Famous names from prestigious academies stepped out one after another, bowing with confidence. Their pieces were smooth musical speeches in the language of classical precision. Everything was flawless, but something was missing. Soul. Then came the final name, wildcard contestant, Elise Laurent. A wave of murmurs rippled through the audience. A woman in the middle row whispered, "Isn't she the janitor?" A man chuckled, probably brought her in for the human interest angle. But those voices, somewhere beyond the stage lights, couldn't reach Elise. She stepped out. No stumbling, no lowered gaze, no defiance, just steady, quiet steps. The Steinway at center stage awaited her, the piano once reserved for renowned artists. This time, no one directed her to a dusty upright. No one questioned her presence. Elise sat down. She took a deep breath, eyes not searching the crowd, not clinging to any familiar face, because this time she believed she belonged. The music began. Not Chopin, not Beethoven, not a name etched into the golden plaques of academia. This was her piece, titled Echoes from a Mop Handle. The opening melody was rustic, almost too simple. But then the emotions began to unfold, as if each note were a footprint through empty corridors, each chord a memory of her mother, each bar the hush of dusty afternoons spent polishing pianos she longed to touch. The music wasn't just sound, it was confession, it was yearning, it was the kind of tears you swallow alone. Elise's hands no longer belonged to a self-taught cleaner, but to someone who had lived each note: pain, hope, disappointment, and finally, belief. In the front row, Whitmore no longer crossed her legs. She sat upright, eyes unblinking. The male judge beside her quietly removed his glasses, wiping the frame, as if afraid to blur something sacred unfolding before him. The young female judge lowered her head into her hands, silent tears falling. The concert hall was completely still, no throat clearing, no clapping out of turn, only faint breathing, as if the entire room had synced to Elise's breath. And when the final note rang out, no dramatic crescendo, no dazzling flourish, just a soft, low tone, like a whispered thank you floating in stillness. The entire audience rose to its feet. Applause thundered like a storm. Many wept. Some remained seated, stunned, as if something had been stripped away. the hardened pride they'd worn for years. Elise didn't bow. She simply placed her hand over her heart, then walked down from the stage, as quietly as she had entered this world, without noise, without anyone leading the way. Even as the applause still roared, Whitmore stood. She didn't say a word to anyone. She simply walked toward Elise as she stepped into the wings, and, in front of the entire hall, placed her hand on Elise's shoulder and whispered, "Elise Laurent, today you've reminded the entire world of music of one truth. Worthiness is not granted by title, it is revealed by soul." Then she returned to the stage and declared, "We do not need a vote. The result is clear. This year's Steinberg belongs to Elise Laurent." That night, after the curtains fell, the lights dimmed, and the clapping faded, Elise sat alone behind the velvet backdrop. The music had ended, but the emotion still lingered in the air like the final note, suspended. The little beige handkerchief, the only thing she had brought, was now soaked with tears, not from pain, but from release. She didn't cry because she had won. She cried because she no longer had to hide behind mops and pitiful glances. Across the stage, many of the esteemed guests still hadn't left. They gathered in small groups, exchanging astonished looks, whispering with trembling voices, "Where did she come from? Who taught her to play like that? That was the purest truth of music I've ever heard." The next morning, as Elise was washing her hands at a small sink behind the concert hall, the very place she had once crouched to scrub each tile, a phone rang in the security guard's pocket. Miguel rushed in, face lit with shock. "Elise, your name. It's everywhere." He handed her the phone. The screen displayed hashtag Elisa Laurent, hashtag from dust to stage, hashtag real music, all trending at the top across the country. The media exploded with headlines: "The janitor who won the nation's most prestigious piano competition." An extraordinary story from behind the curtains. One night that redefined the meaning of talent. The Manhattan Conservatory of Music received thousands of calls. Television networks scrambled to secure interviews. A Paris journalist even wrote, "If Chopin returned from the grave, he would stand and applaud the woman named Elise Laurent." 1 week later, Elise returned to the room she had once cleaned every day, this time not to work, but to say goodbye. As she stepped inside, she saw Whitmore waiting by the old piano, the very one she had dismissed that night. But today, she wore no elegant suit, no heavy makeup, only the look of an older woman, tired but sincere. "Elise," Whitmore said, her voice low and a little shaky, "I've seen many prodigies, but never someone who made me feel that I needed to relearn how to listen." Elise smiled gently. No resentment, no triumph, just a quiet nod. "Music doesn't choose people," she said softly. "It comes to those who've listened long enough, even from behind a janitor's door." The two women, one who had graced every major stage in the world, one who had silently mopped those very stages, now sat side by side, playing an improvised duet. No cameras, no live stream, just music and forgiveness. 3 months later, Elise launched the Laurent Project, a free music training initiative for workers, immigrants, and children who had never had the chance to learn art. The first opening class was held in the same concert hall where she was once mocked. In the front row sat Miguel, Whitmore, the former judges, and even some of the contestants who had once laughed as she stood beside the registration board. One of them, the young man who had once sneered and asked if she was in the wrong room, stepped forward, handing her a bouquet of flowers. "I was wrong," he said. "Thank you for making me want to learn again, this time not to win, but to touch something truly beautiful." An ordinary afternoon, one weekend afternoon, sunlight streamed into a modest apartment in Queens, where Elise still lived simply. She sat by the window, playing an unnamed melody on her piano. Across the street, A little girl stood still, holding her backpack tightly, eyes wide, listening. Elise paused and smiled. "Would you like to learn?" The girl nodded. Elise pointed to the empty chair beside her. "Come in. The piano doesn't choose the player. The final note. In a world full of noise and glittering fame, sometimes a simple woman, no stage, no spotlight, with calloused hands and an unyielding heart, can touch the very thing music was born to do, connect human souls." Elise Laurent didn't just win a competition. She overcame centuries of prejudice. She reminded us all that worth does not lie in titles, accolades, or the shoes you wear. It lies in how bravely you stand up, speak out, and play the music of your own life. If this story touched you, leave a comment, because somewhere there is an Elise quietly dusting the old piano of her life, waiting for just one chance, just one believer, to let her light the room with a music that can never be silenced. She didn't become a legend because she won a competition. She became a legend because she stood up, played her truth, and never waited for permission to shine. Elise Laurent didn't change music. She changed how we measure the value of a human being. If you've ever been looked down on for your humble appearance, if you've ever been told you're not good enough, you don't belong here, remember this story and believe, just like Elise believed, that true talent doesn't need a glittering cloak. It only needs a heart that never gives up and a piano old enough to say something new.